25 reasons to remove McDougal-Littell's world history from your school district. McDougal-Littell uses Islamization of knowledge to teach high school students about the Muslim world, by Paul Sutliff. Islamization of knowledge is an actual topic discussed on a graduate level in Islam in the Western world. You can find it discussed on several college campuses. It basically requires all knowledge to go through an Islamic lens before it's accepted. It can be used to purposely distort history to provide a favorable view of Islam. Below are just a few of the books talking about this. From Chapter 10, The Muslim World, pages 263 to 264, it says, Mecca. During the holy months, caravans stopped in Mecca, a city in western Arabia. They brought the religious pilgrims who came to worship in an ancient shrine called the Kaaba. The Arabs associated this house of worship with Abraham, a Hebrew prophet and believer in one God. Over the years, they had introduced the worship of many gods and spirits to the place. The Kaaba contained over 360 idols brought by many tribes. The concept of belief in one God, called Allah, was known on the Arabian Peninsula. Many Christians and Jews lived there and practiced monotheism. Into this mixed religious environment of Mecca, around 570 A.D., Muhammad was born. Reason 1. This textbook passage lies to students. It says the Arabs associated this house of worship with Abraham, a Hebrew prophet and believer in one God. We know this isn't true because the history of the Arabian Peninsula in this area and the Kaaba had to do with polytheism. You can even go so far back and to look at the Trinity, the daughters of Allah, which were Manat, Allah, and Uzza. Now, this is recorded as recently by Jonathan Porter Berkey. And now, he wrote a book called The Formation of Islam, Religion and Society in the Near East, 600-1800, published by Cambridge. It's an excellent book. I recommend you get it. Reason 2. This textbook lies to students in this passage through omission of fact. The book neglects to inform students that Muhammad was also present at the rebuilding of the Kaaba, where he also served the gods of his clan, naming his first son after one of them. Below you can see a picture of this, a Muslim picture of Muhammad actually taking the black stone and placing it in the Kaaba. According to this textbook on pages 264 to 265, at about the age of 40, Muhammad's life was changed overnight when a voice called to him while he meditated in a cave outside Mecca. According to Muslim belief, it was the angel Gabriel who told Muhammad that he was the messenger of Allah. Reason 3. This textbook passage distorts truth to students. Muhammad's first son died. The death of a child is often unbearable for a parent. Muhammad had called his gods to save their child, but the child still died. It was during this morning of his death that Muhammad had his first encounter with an angel. Now, this can be found in the Hadith. And so began a life-changing event, not just his life, but from that point onwards, the course of mankind took a different turn. Although Muhammad did not fully realize it at the time, this was the beginning of the revelation of the Quran. And in the first years of revelation, Khadijah was instrumental in being not only his wife and companion, but a constant source of emotional, moral, and financial support for him. More than once he turned to her for advice and comfort and was guided by her wisdom in all senses of the word. She was a true mother of the believers. For example, after that first encounter with the angel Gabriel, Muhammad was very frightened, not knowing if he was going mad and imagining things or if he had been possessed by one of the jinn. He clambered downhill as fast as he could and headed home to relate his experiences to his beloved wife. And As she listened to the Prophet's words, Khadijah did not share any of these fears. She realized that something tremendous and awe-inspiring had happened to her husband, and she was certain, knowing him as she did, that he was neither mad nor possessed. "Do not worry," she said, "for by him who has dominion over Khadijah's soul, I hope that you are the prophet of this nation. Allah would never humiliate you, for you are good to your relatives, you are true to your word, you help those who are in need, you support the weak, you feed the guest, and you answer the call of those who are in distress." McDougal-Littell's World History says on page 265, the Hijra. After some of his followers had been attacked, Muhammad decided to leave Mecca in 622. Following a small band of supporters he sent ahead, Muhammad moved to Yathrib, over 200 miles north of Mecca. Reason 4. This passage in the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. Not stated here were that many followers had escaped persecution previously by fleeing to other areas. These attacks were not just physical, also. Most of them were economical. The Meccans boycotted Muhammad and his followers, making it difficult to obtain needed food and goods. Reason 5. This passage of the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. It said Muhammad decided to leave Mecca. This passage does not inform the students that Muhammad had to leave Mecca after his uncle died who was protecting him. If he did not, he would have been killed. Reason 6. This passage of the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. When it says, following a small band of supporters he sent ahead. Muhammad only accumulated about 150 followers at most by the time he left for Yathrib, which was renamed Medina. The 150 feared for their safety in Mecca and left. The majority went to Yathrib. Muhammad was the last to leave for Yathrib. According to Islam, this is when Islam starts. This is important to understand as it explains why there is no division between government and faith in Islam. It also explains the importance of Shari'a in the Islamic community. Because this is when Islam begins, it is also when Muhammad starts to lead a political entity. On page 265 of the textbook it says, in Medina, Muhammad displayed impressive leadership skills. He fashioned an agreement that joined his own people with the Arabs and Jews of Medina. This group accepted Muhammad as a political leader. As a religious leader, he drew many more converts who found his message appealing. Finally, Muhammad also became a military leader in the growing hostilities between Mecca and Medina. Reason 7. This passage in the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. Not stated here is that Muhammad's followers were dependent on those in Yathrib for shelter and food until Muhammad's success in razzias, which are raids on merchant caravans. It was not until his raids became successful that Muhammad's followers grew greatly. This was because those who joined benefited financially, as did Muhammad, who got 20% of each of the razzias. Reason 8. This passage in the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. Muhammad attacked the Qurayza Jews during this time. Ignoring this part of Muhammad's life distorts who he is to the students. After they surrendered, the Qurayza Jews, he personally ordered the execution of between 400 and 900 men, including boys who had just entered puberty. This was an order for the death of all the remaining males puberty age and older. He then gave the women and children as booty, meaning they were to be slaves. Reason 9. The textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students when it says, finally, Muhammad also became a military leader in the growing hostilities between Mecca and Medina. What it doesn't state here is that Muhammad targeted caravans to and from Mecca in his razzias to damage them economically. This made him the cause of the growing hostilities. On page 265 of the text, it says, Returning to Mecca in 630, the Prophet and 10,000 of his followers marched to the outskirts of Mecca. Facing sure defeat, Mecca's leaders surrendered. The Prophet entered the city in triumph. He destroyed the idols in the Kaaba and had the call to prayer made from its roof. Reason 10. Problem of prejudice. Using the term the prophet, not once but twice, confers on Muhammad that he is a prophet to the students. Persons who are not Muslims will find this offensive. This textbook does not refer to Jesus as the Messiah alone, nor does it call him the Christ. This is an example of prejudicial treatment in preference of Islam. Reason 11. The textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students in this passage when it says in 630, the Prophet and 10,000 of his followers marched to the outskirts of Mecca. Facing sure defeat, Mecca's leaders surrendered. Well, yes, Muhammad brought an army of 10,000 men to the outskirts of Mecca. During this time, he sent his uncle Abbas to the Meccans to share his intentions to wipe them out, or they could simply surrender. Well, his uncle captured Abu Sufyan, the chieftain of Mecca, and at this time he had his soldiers light a fire for each man, hinting that his army was much larger. So they would think it's like 100,000 people. And he also showed Abu Sufyan the incredible vastness of his military and the strength of his military. You got to see them in full readiness. Now, he was threatened with conversion or die. This is directly from one of the seerahs. It says, Muhammad repeated his question from the night before. Is it not time for you to know that I am the messenger of God? Abu Sufyan said, I'm still having trouble with that. This angered Abbas. Woe unto you! Accept Islam. Bear witness that there is no God but God, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God, before your head is cut off. Well, Abu Sufyan converted under duress, and later returned to Mecca, informing the people that Muhammad had sworn not to kill anyone who shut themselves in their homes. Muhammad gave orders to only attack those who resisted, and then gave out the names of 10 men to be killed on sight. After the city was safe for him, Muhammad entered triumphantly. 265 of the textbook, it says he, referring to Muhammad, had taken great strides towards unifying the entire Arabian Peninsula under Islam. Reason 12. This passage in the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. This unification was done through Jihad. The stories of Muhammad conquering are in the Quran, the Hadith, and the Sirah. Conversions, being forced, slaughters, and slave taking are considered normal activities under Jihad. These are important things to know. Read accounts of this in the Islamic history, Kitab Futuh al-Budan, which was translated by Philip Hitti. It's also known as the origins of the Islamic State. One passage after Muhammad is taking one of the nearest areas by Mecca, called Al-Ta'if, it includes a part where it talks about this is where Abu Sufyan lost his eye. On page 266 is a reference to the Jerusalem mosque known as the Dome of the Rock. It says, the rock on the site is the spot which Muslims say Muhammad ascended to heaven to learn Allah's will. With Allah's blessing, Muhammad returned to earth to bring God's message to all people. Reason 13. This passage in the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. Not stated here is that the ascension referred to in this passage occurs in a dream of Muhammad, where he rode a mythical creature to Jerusalem. Well, this is important essential knowledge on this topic. It explains why some non-Muslim people state that the Muslims cannot know the exact site in someone else's dream. At the time of this dream, he claimed to visit Solomon's temple. Well, at the time of Muhammad's dream, a church had been built on that spot and remained there until it was destroyed and turned into a mosque. Page 267 of the text, it says, unlike many other religions, Islam has no priest or central religious authority. Reason 14. This passage in the textbook gives inaccurate information to students. Islam has imams who preside over mosques. In the past, Islam had a caliph that presided over all of Islam. Factions at times have led to the existence of multiple caliphs existing at the same time. On page 268 of the text, it says, Sources of Authority. To them the Sunna, or Muhammad's example, is the best model for proper living. Reason 15. This passage in the textbook gives incomplete information to students. The Sunnah is composed of the Sirah and Hadith. It's important to communicate that the Quran alone is not enough for the Muslims. They need the Sirah and the Hadith to follow Muhammad's example because they consider him the perfect man. And in order to copy his example, which they are told to do over and over in the Quran, they have to read the Sirah and the Hadith. On page 268 of the text, it says, Muslims refer to Christians and Jews as people of the book because each religion has a holy book with teachings similar to those of the Quran. This passage in the textbook provides unscholarly statements to students, and this is reason 16. Stating that the Quran is similar to other holy books without providing any proof is unscholarly and offensive to those of other religions. Page 268 of the text, it says, Shari'a law requires Muslim leaders to extend religious tolerance to Christians and Jews. Reason 17. This passage in the textbook lies to students, stating that Shari'a requires Muslim leaders to extend religious tolerance ignores both Shari'a and history. Under Shari'a, there's a separation between Muslims and Dhimmis. Dhimmis were guaranteed protection from attacks by other armies and allowed to continue to live where they do when the lands became Muslim, only if they paid the yearly poll tax. And if by chance the Muslim armies didn't defend them, well, too bad for the Dhimmis. That's actually in the treaty. According to Bat Yaor, in theory, women, the poor, the sick, and the infirm were exempt from the poll tax. However, Armenian, Syriac, Serbian, and Jewish sources offer abundant proof that the jizya was demanded from children, widows, orphans, and even the dead. Bat Yaor cited Nawawi's Minhaj, in that he said, Our religion compels the poll tax to be paid by dying people, the old, even those in a state of incapacity, the blind, monks, workers, and the poor incapable of practicing a trade. As for people who seem insolvent at the end of the year, the sum of the poll tax remains a debt to their account until they should become solvent. Not stated here is that this could make them slaves. Under Sharia, persons who were dhimmis had to wear certain clothing and were not allowed to ride an animal in the presence of a Muslim. Christians and Jews were forbidden from sharing their faith and from repairing their church or building new ones. Sharia also allows Muslims to kill non-Muslims. This is found word for word in the Reliance of the Traveler. On page 269, it says, Rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr and the next three elected caliphs, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, all had known Muhammad. They used the Quran and Muhammad's actions as guides to leadership. For this they are known as the rightly guided caliphs. Their rule was called a caliphate. Reason 18. Islamization of knowledge is practiced in this passage of the textbook. Labeling these leaders as rightly guided in a public high school textbook moves from the realm of learning history into Islamic indoctrination. Page 269. For the sake of Islam, Abu Bakr invoked jihad. The word jihad means striving and can refer to the inner struggle against evil. However, the word is also used in the Quran to mean an armed struggle against unbelievers. For the next 2 years, Abu Bakr applied this meaning of jihad to encourage and justify the expansion of Islam. Reason 19. This passage of the textbook provides misleading information to students. This wording implies that jihad against unbelievers stopped in the year 634. It does not state that the other rightly guided caliphs also used jihad. Instead, it talks of more areas being conquered and the expansion of the empire until 750. This is purposeful delineation of the Islamic application of jihad. Not stated when discussing the term jihad is the Islamic reasoning behind this application of jihad, which would explain to students actions in the present day. Under Islam, the earth is divided into two worlds. Dar al-Islam, the land where the Muslims live and rule using Shari'a. Dar al-Harb, the land of war. Understanding that Islam views areas that are not Muslim in a state of war against Islam until the entire earth is under submission to Allah is essential to understanding the application of jihad in regards to warfare. Page 269 of the text states, reasons for success. The four rightly guided caliphs made great progress in their quest to spread Islam. Before his death, Muhammad had expressed a desire to spread the faith to peoples of the north. Muslims of the day saw their victories as a sign of Allah's support and drew energy and inspiration from their faith. They fought to defend Islam and were willing to struggle to extend its word. Reason 20. This passage in the textbook distorts truth through omission of facts to students. This passage implies that the spreading of faith was done through discussions and logical reasoning. The facts not discussed here are the brutal slaughters, the forced conversions, and the taking of slaves. This spreading of Islam happened through jihad. Page 270 of this text states, treatment of conquered peoples. Because the Quran forbade forced conversion, Muslims allowed conquered peoples to follow their own religion. Christians and Jews, as people of the book, received special consideration. They paid a poll tax in exchange for exemption from military duties. However, they were subject to various restrictions on their lives. Reason 21. This passage in the textbook lies to students. Forced conversions occurred under Muhammad. I mentioned one earlier in this report. Forced conversions occurred under each of the four caliphs referred to as rightly guided. This explains why people have undergone forced conversions to Islam up to present day. One of the more recent recorded incidents occurred when Boko Haram did a video showing off the girls they kidnapped as new converts to Islam. Reason 22. The passage in the textbook lies to students when it said, people of the book received special consideration. They paid a poll tax in exchange for exemption from military duties. However, they were subject to various restrictions in their lives. Islamic histories prove this statement to be false. 13th century An-Nawawi recorded one of the incidences of how you're supposed to pay the tax. It says, the infidel who wishes to pay his poll tax must be treated with disdain by the collector. The collector remains seated, and the infidel remains standing in front of him, his head bowed and his back bent. The infidel personally must place the money on the scales, while the collector holds him by his beard and strikes him on both cheeks. However, according to the majority of scholars, these practices are recommended, but not as something compulsory. As stated previously, those who pay jizya are considered dhimmis. Dhimmis were required to wear special clothing, be subject to additional taxation of their property, the kharaj, become slaves or give their children as slaves if they could not pay the jizya, be subject to having their leaders kidnapped for ransom, not be allowed to ride an animal in the presence of a Muslim, forbidden from using Arabic, be subject to daily humiliation by Muslims, and understand in a court his or her testimony is not valid. On page 274 of the text it states, 4 social classes. Baghdad's population made up of different cultures and social classes, was typical for a large Muslim city in the 8th or 9th centuries. Muslim society was made up of 4 social classes. The upper class included those who were Muslim at birth. Converts to Islam were in the 2nd class. The 3rd class consisted of the protected people and included Christians and Jews and Zoroastrians. The lowest class was composed of slaves. Many slaves were prisoners of war, and all were non-Muslims. Slaves frequently performed household work or fought in the military. Reason 23. This passage is a distortion of truth to students. Calling Dhimmis who were subjected to the 8 items listed in the last slide the protected people misinforms students and gives an inaccurate picture of how they were treated. The only protection they received was from an attack by another country or region. Slaves were also subject to being used sexually. Slaves were taken as a result of jihad or war, as stated. Children of slaves were also the property of their owner. Page 274 of the text states, Muslim women were still expected to submit to men. When a husband wanted to divorce his wife, all he had to do was repeat 3 times, I dismiss thee. The divorce became final after 3 months. Reason 24. This passage is a distortion of truth to students. Not stated here is that a woman's testimony is not accepted in a Muslim court unless she has 2 female witnesses or 1 male witness. Think about the problems with this concerning cases of rape. A woman also must have her husband's permission to file for divorce. This was in a recent article also in Pakistan on February 8th of 2016. Page 274 of the text states, they, referring to the women, had access to education, and among them were poets and scholars. Reason 25. This passage is a distortion of truth through omission of fact to students. To say that women had access to education is not the same thing as considering them intellectual equals. The Hadith recorded by Sahih Bukhari shows Islam does not consider women equal intellectually or religiously. This Islamic historical document explains why Muslim women today are often denied an education. The Hadith states, once Allah's apostle went out to Musalla to offer the prayer, O Id ad-Allah, or Al-Fitr prayer. Then he passed by the women and said, O women, give alms, if I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of the hellfire were you, women. They asked, why is it so, O Allah's apostle? He replied, you curse frequently and are ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you. The woman asked, O Allah's apostle, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion? He said, is not the evidence of 2 women equal to the witness of 1 man? They replied in the affirmative. He said, this is the deficiency in her intelligence. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses? The woman replied in the affirmative. He said, this is the deficiency in her religion. The obvious conclusion here is that school districts using this textbook must either remove it or issue an order not to use the chapter on the Muslim world in any way. McDougal-Littell needs to expose who the author of this chapter is and promise not to hire them again. It is likely this chapter came from the IRCV, the former Council of Islamic Education. If this is the case, the publisher should expose their error of working with this group.